And we're back again for another week. I know it's late, but I ruined my hand and a bunch of other things happened, so I didn't have time yesterday. But now I do. I'm running a little bit late, but it's fine. So, what are we going to talk about this week? So, this week is going to actually be a little bit of a transition out of surveillance. Well, I shouldn't say little, but we'll talk a little bit about it. I finally moved on, finished the surveillance capitalism book, moved on to something else, and I've gone into a book about parenting and parenting techniques and just kind of philosophy, or I don't think philosophy is the right word, but kind of more around ideas around raising children, especially within the context of kind of this whole channel and its purpose, a similar kind of vein. It's like, how do you make kids, how do you put kids down a path where they are going to feel a sense of purpose in their life and be okay with themselves, which is very much like, especially with the earlier on videos of this channel, like that's what this is very much about. And it's just a weird transition, such a weird thing for my reading habits of just like going from like surveillance capitalism straight into like, I need to go to my happy place. Let's read about like parenting techniques and stuff like that. What a goddamn life I live. But you might be thinking, wait a second, Jordan, you don't have kids, so why would you be reading a parenting book? But like everything in life, many major milestones, I think it's about being prepared. And for me personally, I do want kids. So that is going to be something I'm going to have to reconcile with. And you can just play it by ear and do a very hit and run kind of parenting style where you kind of just, you freestyle it. And, I think that can work, but I think it is somewhat dependent on the parents you had and what you've learnt over, in your own adult life, and how that's then going to inform the, behaviors and rules and the way you go about raising your kids. Because, I think about some of the ways my parents did things, and then I'm like, man, I would never do that with my kids, or I'll never be like that. But then there are other things where at the time I was, obviously unruly or didn't agree with what they were saying, but I look back on it now and I was like, man, I was just being a piece of shit. And like, look, some of it just goes with the territory of like, kids are just that age, and they're still people learning to become themselves. And I think that's such a hard part, where in the teenage years, that's where you really learn that you're trying to become yourself, and then you kind of become aware of yourself. And I think that's where so much angst actually does come from, is that self-awareness, because you realize that you're at like the bottom of the totem pole and you've just done nothing in your life. You're pretty useless, like for the most part. Like you're 16, 17, like what are you really doing? I know there are those examples of like this kid at age 12, invented this and now he's a millionaire, and he's only like, and he's turning 13 next month, and you're just like, damn, what was I doing at 13? But that's not the point. Those are really outlier examples, and I'm sure if you went through those people's lives, like, although there's much highs, I'm sure there are incredible lows as well. And you always hear about those stories of those kids doing incredible, but then you never hear like what happened like 10 years later, like, are they still just as good? Probably are, knowing it, probably are, but like, are they still as outstanding at 13? Oh, sorry, at like, 30, 35 as they were at 13 when they did that incredible whatever it is. But, what? Too much of a rambling tangent. I think we could be there for hours. But what is the core message of this book I'm reading? So I'm about halfway through, and it's by Wayne Dyer, and it says, I think it's called What Do You Really Want for Your Children? And that's pretty much the question and the main core, perspective of the book is, what do you actually want for your kids? And what he describes is essentially, and he regularly gives references to this throughout the book, is he describes you're looking to aim to make like a no-limit kid, a no-limit person. And what that kind of means is someone who, if I had to really boil it down into like one like singular linchpin thing that everything else, all the other benefits, all the other smaller subset parts about parenting then kind of would shoot off from, would be someone, you want to raise a kid that is internally safe and secure and confident in themselves. Because if they don't have that internal, and this is one of the chapters he talks about is like, if a child doesn't feel internally like they have some sense of self-worth and can be confident in who they are, regardless of what other people think or what other people say, or whether or not they achieve a certain external goal or external achievement, in like some sort of society's achievement board, whether that be topping out some sort of class or getting really high marks in all the classes they do, or whatever it necessarily is, or doing very well sportingly in a sports setting. If they don't have that internal security, they will look for that security or that sense of confidence from these external things, whether that be their academic record or whether that be their sporting record or or how they are perceived by their peers and the wider world. Not saying that those, and the book says, and I agree as well, it's like not saying that those things are necessarily bad in and of themselves, like wanting to do well at school or putting in the effort to be a good athlete is not necessarily a bad thing. But if they don't have that internal side, they will fixate on that external thing, which will never truly give them the confidence that they are looking for, and it will greatly reduce their ability to be a multifaceted person, because they will, like I said, fixate on that one thing and then just dive headfirst into it the whole time, hoping, like, a perfect example within, like, the environment we have is, or like, as adults, is money. Like, a lot of people obsess over money and they're always looking for that security from money, but it doesn't matter how many numbers or how many digits in your bank account, you never truly feel satisfied with it. And like I said, that can only come from within. So the book is trying to get you down that path of like raising kids that have that self-confidence and not arrogance. Like you don't want to raise a kid, and when he's talking, he's not saying raising a kid where like, they did a shit and it's like, oh wow, amazing, you're the best person in the world, the best. No, it's not like that. It's more about letting them know that it's okay to fail, but it's also, it's about getting up and improving yourself and, making yourself, pretty much instilling self-development concepts and mindsets into children, where it's like, hey, you failed on this test, but you know what? That's not the end of the world. You can figure it out if you're good enough. And what he normally talks about is like listening to kids and as people, because, very much he says that it's very easy for us as adults to view children as these like kind of minor people, like these people in training sort of entities. And he advises against that because he thinks, look, kids will have their own goals or what they want to achieve in life, and they're trying to tell you all these things. Like, and I find this all the time, like with just people in general, like they're always trying to bring something forward to you. And same with your child, like your child is trying to bring a story or some sort of thing about their life forward to you. And if you say that, the kid can't, like, let's say the kid doesn't have great eyesight and the kid wants to be a pilot or something, telling them that and making them, like, in some sense feel bad about themselves or feel inferior, that they won't be able to achieve that goal because of some sort of circumstance, is going to, it's going to put the brakes on people when they, on your child, and it's going to set up a habit of they should, like, kind of reduce their expectations of themselves and life because of external circumstances that can exist. Whereas what he'd rather suggest is, if the kid wants to be a pilot, be on board with that and be okay with that, and knowing fully yourself that it might not even be possible for that kid to do that, but give them the benefit of the doubt of going down that path. And if it really is as bad as it is, what he says is normally what will happen is the kid will in turn kind of figure things out and, transition their path forward to something else. Like the star that's motivating them, which was previously being a pilot, will move to something else. And if not, and, he gives an example of this, like, it's the reason why I'm using it, is sometimes, they can be change makers, like, the example they gave was someone's daughter that wanted to be a pilot, but, had vision issues, so they couldn't really fly. But then, when she grew up and became, like, was older and, was, campaigned for changes in the regulations so that she could be could be a flying instructor, and she has become one. And pretty much it allowed for her to wear glasses and, wear glasses so that she could be able to see and, be okay with it. So that's someone who has been able to achieve their goal, even though it wasn't like they didn't just move to another one, they still kind of went down the same path. It's not like the way you attain your goals is not always the way you kind of think them to be. So, telling your kids they can't do something is probably not the wisest choice of thing, because it's quite surprising how I think about even in my own life, like in the past 5 or 6 years, I had some certain goals of things I wanted to achieve. And in the end, I still achieved the end goal, but it went about it, like the way I went it, like it came to be was just so different, or like was quite a large departure from what I had originally envisioned. And that's why I think, with goals and trying to achieve them, and like what people want out of life, and listening to your kids in that respect, if it's not functional for them and if it's not going to work out for them, they will know that, they will come to terms with that in their own time, and they will make the adjustment without even you needing to say anything. Another aspect of what he was talking about, and like something I thought was interesting, was kind of to help build that no limit kid, or to build that internal confidence. He says it's very unwise to use guilt or or put anxious thoughts in kids' minds by making them feel bad about themselves, even though they've done something wrong. And the kind of quote he uses at the time to kind of explain this and put it into like one kind of line is, you aren't your behaviors, like you're something that acts, but you're not your actions, you know what I mean? And well, I'm sure there are some actions where it's just like, wow, you really are that bad. But I'd say for a kid, and for most people, like, you're an acting entity, but you aren't your actions. Like, you can change those and you can still be who you are, but the outcomes or the behaviors that were, let's say, negative or antisocial, are gone. And that's when he talks about, like, kind of punishing or like giving consequences for kids when they've done like the wrong thing. He says guilt tripping them is not really a good idea, because what will eventually happen is they will figure that out as a method, like, because kids aren't idiots. They're learning from you and their surroundings all the time. Like, if you're using guilt to get what you want from them, they will eventually learn that is a mechanism or tool, like guilt tripping someone into getting what they want. And that's just going to be, and what he says is like, that's going to be very bad for you if you use it in the early years. Like, let's say a kid in a shopping center is like, it sees the chocolate bars at the counter and is like, "Mummy, I want this chocolate bar," and you go, "No," because XYZ reason. You kind of guilt trip them out of it. They'll kind of internalize that, even though it doesn't seem like a huge thing. But later on in life, when they're in the teenage years, they'll use that as a method, like even without them knowing. Like, it'll just be a subconscious thing that they'll pick up. And I know I've done that in the past with my parents. And look, there will still always be a degree of that, because kids will try new things no matter what the age. They'll always try and everyone's always trying new things to get what they want. So they will try it, but if they realize that you're not going to do that, and also you're not going to let them get away with that kind of behavior or that kind of technique, that's kind of pushing kids towards a mindset where they've got to take responsibility, where they have to more face consequences and be okay with that, be accepting of them, of the consequences, without having to feel bad about them. And I think that's kind of an important thing when you think about it, because it's something that would carry throughout people's lives. I know it sounds crazy to use the word trauma in an instance like that, but it's kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts. If you slowly and subtly push your kid towards a direction where, like, away from internal security, and them being able to maintain that, then that's just going to erode their ability to kind of make a sense of self in the world on their own. They'll be looking to other things, and it's so hard for me also to understand, because I don't have kids myself, and for me, picking up the responsibility of a dog has been like really good for me just overall, and I'm hoping eventually once I have kids, it's the same thing. And I'm reading this book and trying to like think of ways in which I would use these like ideas or teachings to kind of be a better example for my kids than my parents were for me. Not saying that my parents did a bad job or anything, but you can see it in households where there's domestic violence and stuff like that, where you see that intergenerational trauma, and that's probably like one of the most acute cases of where you see it, of like where you see physical or, you know, emotional abuse being done to, you know, a spouse, and the kid internalizing that and then later doing that, you know, seeing that as not necessarily an acceptable thing, but something that they revert to later on in their life in their own relationships. That's probably like the most extreme acute example, but even the smaller kind of stuff would, you know, when you think about it, would still be getting picked up. And I think about what I do with this channel and what its kind of purpose for is one, to be like a reminder to me of like all the important things that I've like learnt and like think that are valuable lessons or teachings to take along that I want to remind myself of. Also, it's to share it with you, but in a third kind of distant way, and this is like distant future and very distant future, I want it to be almost like I know as a parent you're not always going to be there, but you can still provide guidance on things, and this is what I hope my videos do over time, especially for my kids when they start growing up. You know, when I eventually do have them and stuff like that, is they can watch these videos and use it as a way of figuring out or like getting a bit of guidance from me without actually me having to be physically there. So I guess I'm already pre-planning my own fatherly duties, which is incredible in its own when I think about it in some ways. But obviously I want to be there face to face, but you know, life happens, and unfortunately, and that's actually a thing he talks about, is like you have to show that your kids that it's okay to have your own life beyond just being a parent. Because what will happen is later on, if your whole life is lived through the lens of your kid, then once they actually grow up and leave, then you're going to have that empty nest syndrome, which I thought was, you know, kind of fair and true. And, you know, there's always going to be a degree of that. Like, it's always sad, I'm sure. Like, I'm sure when I moved, like, out, and, you know, my brother and myself moved out of the house, I'm sure even though my parents, you know, are really good and excellent parents and did a great job, I think, I was probably the bigger problem, like, was, you know, being an asshole, but they would have still felt that, a bit of that. It's not too bad, because I do live, like, you know, relatively close to my parents, but, you know, I don't think that's something you want to have, like, is this, like, nagging feeling of, like, your life is unfulfilled, or, like, you know, you try and live through your kids so hard that once they actually do start living their own life, you kind of feel empty inside. I feel like that's a gross kind of thing. So that's another kind of thing he talks about. I do recommend reading the book, like, even if you do or don't have kids. I think it's something, you know, worth knowing, or at least if you're interested in having kids and you don't have them at the moment, like me, myself. But if you do have kids, please have a read and tell me what, like, if you tried to apply the techniques or some of the stuff he brings forward, some of the ideas, what did you find were like the challenges to it? Like what were the challenges to you applying it? But like also, where were the successes? Like, where did you actually see difference, and where did you find issues, or like, you know, your roadblocks, at least maybe even just initially, but maybe you break through it eventually, to kind of raising a no limit person. And I think that's kind of what I would love to give to my kids as a gift, is like this ability for them to kind of, where I feel like I've almost got into myself, where like I'm so internally secure in my own mind, like as a person. Like, a lot of people hate going inside their own mind because they don't like what they see and they don't like the internal. They're always wanting to be distracted by the external so they don't have to deal with what's on the inside. Me, I'm sure there's a degree of it, like no one's completely like perfect, but for me, I'm just so internally okay with who I am as a person that to me, everything, all the external matters are just me going through the motions. Like, not necessarily in a bad way or a mundane way, but I just feel so internally secure. I know if everything was taken away from me, I would still thrive, you know what I mean? And I think that's what I want to give to my kids, is like the ability, like, to have that inward security and inward upward lift, that no matter the circumstances in life or what happens to them externally or whatever, they will have that fire in them, that light that will guide them through all the ups and downs. And I think that is what every parent wants to give their kids. And to me, that's what I want to give my kids. And yeah, you know, I'm rambling, so I'm just going to stop it there. Sorry if it's a bit deranged today. It's been a hectic one, but I think you get the idea of what I'm trying to say. And I think that's the important part. So till next week, see you then.